We're thrilled to welcome Will Patrick, CEO and co-founder of Culture Biosciences, to the show today. Thank you once again, Will, for joining us. Will, can we kick things off with a brief personal intro?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name's Will Patrick from Culture Biosciences. I'm the CEO and co-founder there. I think a core thing about me is I love fabrication and manufacturing. I've loved that since I was a little kid. And it's sort of why I got into biomanufacturing in the first place. I found it to be a fascinating way of making new molecules, new substances, new materials to build things with. I sort of caught that bug when I was in graduate school, and sort of saw the possibilities of using biology to make new substances, molecules, materials, etc. And wanted to contribute to that. Wanted to figure out ways that I could accelerate biomanufacturing. Wanted to basically figure out how I could make a difference there and further the whole field. And so that's sort of eventually, what led me to start the company.
And that passion is a perfect intro. Before we dive too deep, can you just provide a brief introduction to Culture for us as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Culture is, what we do is we develop and run cloud bioreactors. What that means is we have a facility that has a lot of bioreactors in there that we build. Our clients are biotech companies, and they can access those reactors, access that infrastructure for a fee, and they can run all of their different bioreactor experiments they might want to run. So whether it's to test out different cell lines or strains or optimize a manufacturing process, they can run all their experiments with us. They access our laboratory in the cloud. So that what that means is they go into their web browser, they go into our portal, they schedule their experiments, they look at the data in real time, they sort of run their experiments with us as if it was in their own lab, but of course it's not. So that's what the business does. We started at the small scale, working, we have sort of research and development scale bioreactors, or you could call them like bench scale bioreactors. Where we're taking things is we'll have larger and larger scale systems, so we can continue to support our clients as they're developing and scaling up their bioprocesses.
Definitely leaving us somewhere to go. Michael, would you like to explore and dive a little bit deeper into that story?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Will, for sharing that kind of overview. I think it does a great job opening up to the next point. We'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the origin story of Culture. In 2016, you had a vision to transform the biomanufacturing process to more of a digital experience. And so you would let us off in the direction. We'd love to explore a bit deeper into how Culture came about.
Yeah. In 2015, I graduated from my master's program at the MIT Media Lab. And I had been working on like biofabrication and using biomaterials and all sorts of interesting stuff that I won't get into. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I had this really cool opportunity after grad school to become an artist in residence at Autodesk. It was an amazing program that they used to run out of Pier 9, Autodesk's sort of fabrication facility in San Francisco. And basically you could get access to all these tools and build anything that you dreamt up over the course of 4 months. And so it was a really amazing experience for me, fresh out of grad school. And I built an art project, which was an at-home bioreactor for therapeutic production. It was a speculative project, meaning it didn't work. It was purely for, it was an art project, right? And it was sort of speculating on a future potential of what if you could basically brew organisms in an at-home bioreactor that'd be producing therapeutics. Anyway, I'm happy to talk more about that. It was a fascinating experience. But most importantly, it was my first time building a bioreactor. Most importantly to this conversation, let's say, it was the first time building a bioreactor. And at that time, one of my very simple thoughts, like I thought it was like a very dumb thought at the time. I was like, oh, again, I'm just like learning about bioreactors because I'm like building a bioreactor. I'm like, oh, there probably is like a AWS for bioreactors, or if there isn't, that probably is a good idea. Just very casual, very, very casual. So that was probably in 2015 as I was building this at-home bioreactor. So then, during the spring of that year, I was actually looking at starting a sort of industrial biotech company with a few industry veterans in the industrial biotech space. And it was really exciting. It was in the biomaterials space, an area that I have a lot of passion about. But it turned out when I was working on that, I felt a strong, it was really helping to understand the timelines and costs associated with scaling up these processes. And honestly, like my role on that team was going to be like to take these new biomaterials and make interesting things with them. And I wasn't going to have like pilot scale materials to be able to use to turn into various things for a few years. So really understanding, again, those costs and timelines of scaling up these new biomaterials made me think that maybe my time would be better spent trying to work on that problem versus like actually starting a biomaterials company. So I sort of like came back to that thought of like, oh, maybe there should be an AWS for bioreactors. And at the same time, I sort of reconnected with a friend of mine who had been, had been at that time already a friend for about 10 years. We were like college roommates, and we had worked also at Google together, Matt. And Matt was just sort of had been working at a startup, and his startup was acquired by Facebook. And it wasn't his startup. He was an employee at the startup, and he wasn't interested in joining Facebook. And so he was now like a free agent again. So I was like really excited to maybe work on something with him. And so we were sort of thinking about various ideas that are sort of associated with this core problem of like the difficulty and of expense and timeline of scaling up bioprocesses. And so one of the ideas, we had several that we were evaluating, but one of the ideas was this like AWS for bioreactors idea. And so we went through this just like process of evaluating it. A lot of that was just literally going and sitting in people's labs who had bioreactor labs. So basically this is now like a long time ago. I guess this is like almost 6 years ago now. At that time, all the companies we were talking to, they would basically build out their own bioreactor labs. So they would hire a bunch of staff. They would buy this expensive equipment. They'd set up these they'd try to set up these like data pipelines and et cetera, set up all the analytical. And the first thing that was really obvious was, well, everyone's doing the same thing. There's not a lot of differences here. And also, none of these companies are talking about this operation as like their core IP or anything. This is something that you have to do, but it's not necessarily something that is it's quite expensive. It's quite time consuming. It's not really big value add. And so it seemed that was like an initial instinct, like, oh, maybe this AWS for bioreactor idea could be interesting, actually. We focus on making it really good, lower cost, efficient, high quality. We can add in lots of great analytical tools. We can make a better experience. Seems like that might be interesting. So we kept just evaluating it. We did a good amount of like financial modeling, looking at costs, CapEx, OpEx costs for running these labs at these customers. What would, if we did various types of innovations, how would it impact that financial model? And so sort of a 3 to 4 month long process where we sort of evaluated, this looks like a pretty good idea. Like we can see a path here. We're taking a big sort of leap of faith that if we build this sort of outsourced small scale like cloud lab for bioreactors that people will transition and not build it out themselves. Like that was a leap of faith. It made sense to us, but no one had done that before. So that was sort of a risk we were taking. But we thought it made a lot of sense for all the reasons I've already sort of highlighted, and so we decided to set forth and go for it.
Well, that's a great introduction, and again, must have been a challenging certain area to go into, having no formal background, but a strong diligence process, and certainly great instincts from your previous experiences, being able to kind of learn as you need to. So I'd love to dive a little more into the approach that Culture is taking now to being able to add that value for clients. And so could you maybe share a bit more about some of the services you're offering, the technology that is doing this, and how you're able to improve kind of the state of biomanufacturing in the industry?
Yeah, so like what we do today is we have a facility. It has a large number of small scale bioreactors. These are all systems that we build. We have designed the electronics and software to sort of like enable this cloud solution. What I mean by that is like all the data is available in real time in the cloud. And so you can see like live streams of all the data coming back. So we have that facility set up. Our clients are accessing it by basically like a monthly subscription. We call it a guaranteed capacity model. They basically say, okay, over this next year, I'm going to need, 12 bioreactors worth of capacity, and sort of they, sort of pay for that. And what they get is they get, that capacity. They get the access to our software platform, so they can look at all the data and do all the logistics and scheduling. Yeah, and we have a quality guarantee as we do the work. And so if we don't, if there's any operational challenges or errors, we have a quality guarantee for our clients. But that's basically how it works. It's fairly simple. There's a lot of details in terms of, all the details around scheduling, all the details around certain types of processes we do or don't do. And, we could talk about that stuff if there's interest, but it's all sort of like more of the detail oriented stuff. But that's fundamentally what it is. Additionally, we have analytical, basically like analytical chemistry, sort of the same thing. When you're running bioprocess experiments, if you think about it, what you're trying to do is understand everything that's happening with the metabolism of the organism all throughout the bioprocess. And so you want to know very basic stuff like how many cells are there and are they viable, right? You also want to know how much of the carbon source is being consumed. So you need to be able to do a lot of assays to understand maybe the glucose concentration or whatever is your carbon source. So there's a bunch of other metabolites that you want to analyze. And then additionally, you want to understand whatever is the product that is being produced, how much of it is there, and also, what's the product quality. So all that type of analytical chemistry work is we also offer that. So when we pull samples, we run it all on those different on those different devices. That data then goes into our website, and so is available to the client as well. So that's the core suite of like services today. We have just added 5-liter reactors. So our core infrastructure up until now has been 250 ml. So it's like the size of like a Coke can or a coffee cup, right? And that's really good for all of your optimization studies. We've added a 5-liter system that we've also designed and developed in-house. That's good for like material generation and some initial scale up. We're developing a pilot scale system right now as well. So if we're doing pilot scale manufacturing, so that's in development and looking for use by customers sometime next year. So we're continuing to go up in scale, and that's to enable our customers to sort of continue on and work with us as they're scaling a process and continuing to work with Culture as they're going bigger and bigger scale.
Well, thank you for that. It's an interesting model. You're much more than just a company who can really bring in a lot of equipment, expensive equipment in-house and offer a simple cost advantage, but you're innovating across the software, a lot of the analytical capabilities, even the dashboarding and real-time connection, which is of a lot of value to researchers, of course. And so one may think of culture without having looked deeply into either a hardware, a software company, perhaps a contract manufacturing company, but you seem to be some, but neither at the same time. So we would be interested in perhaps how would you explain the model of culture to an individual in the biopharmaceutical industry? And how are you thinking about innovating the future of biomanufacturing perhaps differently than some of these models?
Yeah. So specifically for someone in the biopharmaceutical industry, which is a really good caveat, the way I would describe culture is we're in between a CDMO and doing it yourself. So a CDMO is more of a full service, service provider. They want to go, vial to vial manufacturing, right? Like I have a new molecule that I'm looking to make. Let's go work with the CDMO to produce it from vial to vial. And, you'll work with them, through the development process, the scale up, through your different, making clinical drug substance all the way into full-scale drug manufacturing post-approval. And alternatively, you could do this all in-house and develop all of your internal infrastructure. Culture is in between. Culture basically provides the infrastructure to your internal team, where your internal team is still the scientists that are developing a process. You are not externalizing your IP development and your development of cell lines, new processes, whether it's upstream or downstream. Culture is just providing you the infrastructure to do it. So you have this great advantage over the CDMO model where you're owning your own IP, you're owning your own technology development. You're not outsourcing all of that, but you are getting the benefits of a CDMO where you are externalizing your infrastructure. You don't have to be worrying about big capital outlays for your biomanufacturing infrastructure. We also have advantages. We have the same advantages of in-house that you don't get with CDMOs. So in-house, you have all the data. Hopefully, you have all the data at your fingertips. You could walk into the lab. You could go look at the data if you want to. You can make changes. You can be a lot more nimble. You can make process. You just have more control. With culture, you get that advantage. With a traditional CDMO, you may set up an experiment and then hear back 3 to 6 months later about how it went and what the data was, right? It's like your input into a CDMO might be a spreadsheet and your output might be a spreadsheet, a long time in the future. So with culture, you get that real-time access to data and control as if it was in your own facility. So that's sort of the different experience that we're sort of creating. And that's how it's sort of, we think about it and how it's different compared to the traditional sort of biopharma service providers, the CDMO market, and how it's sort of also different from an internal lab. So that's how I would describe it to someone in the sort of biopharma manufacturing world.
And as we think about that greater level of control, we're nowadays especially starting to hear more and more about the development of full stack bioengineering with companies like Twist, like Ginkgo, leading genome and organism design. And there's a vision that the industry is moving towards that sort of horizontal integration or vertical integration in different cases. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about the evolution of the bioengineering stack and where culture fits in. And if, in your opinion, you've seen this mirrored, especially coming from more of a tech background, if you've seen this mirrored in the evolution of other industries.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from other industries. And I'm definitely happy to talk about that. And generally, I really do think this is sort of an inevitable direction for biomanufacturing to head, is this development of horizontal platforms that do pieces of the value chain, the biomanufacturing value chain. Yeah, I mean, like going back to more of the historical examples, take personal computing in the 90s, in terms of how we built desktop computers and how it changed. The entire semiconductor industry is also an obvious example. If you sort of go case by case in terms of these different, manufacturing of different products, it's classically going from vertically integrated players to ones where you have lots of horizontal platforms. I think so that's the overarching trend that makes sense. When you take one step further and you start asking questions like, okay, let's look from the past and what learnings can we have about how maybe that vertically integrated manufacturing value chain, how does that get debundled, let's say, into these horizontal platforms? Like, what are the lessons learned there? One of the things, if you go read like the management theory about this, is if you think about the sort of, if you take a value chain and let's say it's just a bunch of little, like a chain of events, like little blocks, right? And you're basically asking the question of like, okay, all these blocks are currently done by one company, but we're saying in the future, let's say there's 10 blocks. How are those going to be 10 separate companies? Are there going to be like, three company types that do like 3 or 4 blocks each? So one way to think about that is, if there are certain steps where if one company is doing multiple steps, then there's some kind of a synergy or value add. That's one reason where to think about how a stack might be unbundled. Another one is if you're thinking about whoever is the product company, whoever is the client of these horizontal platforms, they need to have a really good way of just doing the basic input output. They need to be able to make an order, and then they have to know what they're going to get when they make that order. And that might sound simplistic, but it's actually a hard problem when you're moving from something that's typically very vertically integrated. It can be very messy, and you don't have to have very clear like input output criteria from a product company. But that needs to be developed for these horizontal platforms to work really well. So like maybe let's take gene synthesis as an example. That's an example where the input and output can be really nicely done. It's like, here's the DNA sequence. Great, that's your input. That's a really easy thing to be able to start doing as a horizontal platform. And so that's probably why Twist and others do that. And early on in this sort of like unbundling of the biomanufacturing stack, like that maybe happened earlier, I would posit probably because it's just very easy to do that input output. That's actually a big challenge on the bioprocess space. It's much more complicated to do the input output. And that's one of the areas where we've worked hard on developing new solutions and tools. So this would be like tech transfer, basically. So, when you're tech transferring a bioprocess from one company to another company, traditionally this is done using a like 30-page Word document, which is just a description of the process. So there's no standards for this. There's no there's no way that this happens in an orderly fashion. And so figuring out how to make that a more standardized input output is, I think, a really core need, just to use one example. But anyway, I could keep going on, but I think in general, our bet at Culture is that it makes a lot of sense. If you think about the stack, first of all, like all the DNA synthesis, that makes sense to all be done by one type of company. Then if you think about the next sort of step in the stack, organism engineering, the core technologies involved with organism engineering, well, first of all, they're very different than DNA synthesis. So it sort of makes sense that you might have specialists who do organism engineering really effectively. Also, just if you're thinking about the infrastructure and know-how, et cetera, organism engineering is very different than bioprocess. So, the thought is, okay, then, it makes sense to have another sort of company or sets of companies that are very focused on the bioprocess side. My perspective is that you still need to have the product company, still needs to have the scientific know-how with working with these different platforms, particularly if you think about something like organism engineering and bioprocess engineering, because the organism engineering, let's say you're working with some group that would be doing your organism engineering, and you can be, this is all hypothetical, but you could be accessing their website and you could be, doing your organism designs or using their various design tools and seeing all the data and like they're screening all of the different strains. And you're like, great, these are some optimized strains that I want to like move forward in my biomanufacturing process. You still need to have that know-how to understand how does the strain improvement or the strain optimization that you're doing there, what's the connection to your bioprocess optimization or your bioprocess development. And so I do think that the future state here is where you have these product companies where you have still a lot of scientific know-how that are sort of quarterbacking the development of an optimized biomanufacturing process, working with these horizontal platforms, which are specialists and really, really highly performant at doing their sort of piece of the value chain with really clear input and output. So that's sort of where I see this going in terms of the different pieces of the value chain and different parts of it. And culture, I think, again, where we can fit in is being this on the bioprocess infrastructure side, providing that sort of layer really effectively for all of those bioproduct companies.
What an incredibly thorough answer. It's clear you've been thinking about this a lot, and as you set the growth and think about where culture should go next. And as you think about that, the lens of the growing bio, especially in the biopharmaceutical space in the next few decades, how do you think about culture's role as a scaled player in cloud biomanufacturing?
So we're going to be working towards it. And by scaled player, I presume you mean like larger scale manufacturing?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to be working towards it. And we're going step by step. So the next step for us would be pilot scale manufacturing, which in our case, what that means is like hundreds of liters. And then we'll be continuing to see how we can push that higher and higher scale. When we think about all of our infrastructure that we've ever built, we've always looked at it from the lens of where can we engineer new infrastructure that has core advantages for us at Culture. Usually either it could be from the customer experience side, like enabling the cloud solution, but it can also be from like capital cost improvement side, it can be from efficiency improvement side. So we do really look for those advantages when we build out infrastructure. Because you think traditionally, right, like you're thinking like, okay, building out a pilot scale biomanufacturing infrastructure, it's not normally what you think about as cheap to do, first of all, from a capital cost perspective. And also it's not necessarily high gross margin. So when we think about building out pilot scale manufacturing, we want to think through, okay, here's the different ways we can innovate on our technology to make it something that is much more attractive to scale out, where it can be lower capital costs, so our return on investment period is shorter, or it can be very efficient to run, so we had higher gross margins. So it's really important for us to be thinking about those things. And so we see that opportunity at pilot scale manufacturing. We also see some opportunities larger scale, and we'll keep sort of iteratively going to larger scales and look at, continue to look at opportunities to go bigger and bigger scale for at manufacturing scale.
And so it sounds like in your view, scale is definitely one of the opportunities available in cloud biomanufacturing. Are there others that you're also excited by, or perhaps challenges you're also seeking to address?
Yeah, so other than going larger scale, I think the biggest opportunity for us at Culture is on the software and data side. So we already help a lot of clients already by just simply being able to have all of their data readily accessible and easy to analyze. there's it's sort of sad, but like when you build out a traditional lab of bioreactors, there's a lot of current customers that we know who have old bioreactors that it's difficult. It just takes like a lot of internal engineering time and our pain to get like the data off of those systems into like some kind of backend data system where you can then analyze time series data and do any type of data analysis, right? So there's a lot of just like having to manually build out all of those data pipelines. So already today, just simply by having accessible data that's ready to analyze is a huge value add from our software perspective. It's very low bar, but so I think there's way more we could do there to do better software tooling for designing of bioprocess experiments, designing of processes, just really effective analysis of experimental data. So these could be things like DOE design tools, but there's just really interesting possibilities. So one thing that we're very interested in is like doing simulations. We already do simulations more from the purpose of validating the experimental designs from our customers. Like if they're going to run an experiment at Culture, we run a simulation of it first to sort of, it's almost like a linting system if you're familiar with software, just to make sure it's going to run appropriately and correctly. But building a simulation system that's actually a real simulation that can be used as a design tool is a pretty obvious and exciting possibility for Culture. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity for us there where we could make our software platform, which is today mostly focused on logistics, handling, and sort of data analysis, make that more of a design tool to accelerate the process of creating an optimized process.
Oh, that's really exciting. And maybe I'm projecting too far into the future, but at this point we've discussed Culture and your approach to date. We've projected out a bit into the future and you've talked about some of what's coming next. I'd be curious if in addition to having design tools, this can also overlay into potential predictive analytics around what challenges might be faced as the real-time data is coming in. So it's almost remote real-time monitoring of the culture processes, and then predicting what may or may not go wrong through designs we don't yet understand.
Yeah, there's so many different possibilities that could be possible, and from very simplistic stuff like, let's say you're running an experiment and it's most of these experiments are optimization experiments. You're trying to optimize for maybe the highest amount of titer, so the most production of your product, or you might be optimized for product quality. If you just had a simple, and I shouldn't say simple, if you had a simulation that said some of these experiments, by the way, if you're doing a mammalian cell culture process, might be 2 weeks long. If you have a simulation that's on day 4 or day 5 of your 14-day process that says, hey, this experiment, this run right here is not going to be a good one. Like, it's not going to be optimized. We can see it already. Let's kill this experiment. Just run stopping like that, which, by the way, is a very common practice when you're doing like training of a neural network. Run stopping would just save a lot of time, cost, and allow you to try new things. So there's lots of like that's a pretty simple idea, but being able to, there's lots, you can think of like much more advanced ideas, like you could be learning in real time and then be running simulations, not only of this scale, but like simulate it at the next scale. There's lots of different possibilities with the data analytics side of that. And I think, again, like, we're not, by the way, the only ones working on this. There's lots of people working on bioprocess simulation. But I think Culture is in a nice position where, because we work with so many clients, and we also are providing them data analysis tools, if we can also provide them these types of simulation tools, I think it could be really helpful. And we're sort of in somewhat of a unique position to be able to do that for them. So it is an area that I think, I would expect to see more from Culture in the years to come, because I think it just would be very value add to our customers, and they could get a lot from it. And so it's definitely an excited area and direction for us. Oh,
I
can.
think I was on there. This might be a silly question, but just in terms of even geographic area, how do you think about scaling the physical space necessary, especially as you go through pilot scale and beyond? Are you planning on moving closer to client facilities? Will you distribute your network in that regard, or do you think you'll still keep things in a more concentrated geographic location?
It's a great question. And we're currently in the process of planning and building an East Coast facility. And when we think about locating facilities, actually the number one thing we're looking at is how can we quickly scale versus, if we think about the stack ranking of priorities, like just the ability to scale at low risk quickly is like the number one thing we're solving for. And then probably the other factors that also play a role, but are maybe not the top factors, are being close to customers, to your point. And then the other factor is just like operational costs and things like that. So those are all like the multivariate factors. In general, we do see that this is likely to have multiple different facilities. The reason why East Coast is, it is nice to have be on that Eastern time zone for clients who are in the Eastern time zone. It's a little bit for folks who want to come visit the facility. It's a little bit closer to them. Future facilities, it will make sense to have a facility in the EU because just for shipping of various things like a genetically modified organism, shipping within the EU is a lot easier and just like not as challenging versus shipping across borders. And then also the time zone aspect. So basically the answer is not like you don't want this like totally distributed everywhere. There's benefits of having consolidation and having larger facilities with more reactors, so you can have more efficiency and make those facilities better. But you do want to have some geographic distribution in order to optimize for being on the same time zones as clients and various like shipping and things like that. So that's sort of the high level answer to your question.
Well, thank you for sharing so much. So far, we've chatted about the history of culture, chatted about the current technologies approaches, a lot of the intentions to scale, opportunities, the future. We would love to now kind of peer one more time back into the past and ask, what were some of the greatest challenges that you faced while scaling this company? And at the same time, what have been some of the greatest accomplishments or milestones that you've seen to date?
Yeah, one big challenge is we took the approach from the beginning of the company to sort of like build the plane while flying it, so to speak. Meaning when we started, we had raised a teeny bit of money through a pre-seed round. Me and Matt, with like one or two, and like with 2 full-time employees, decided we're going to just make the first version of this service and actually generate revenue within a year. So we built bioreactors, we set up our initial software, and we were working with one client within I think it was 10 months. And ever since then, we've been running experiments for clients for 5 years. And so we wanted to go with this approach of rapidly iterate. And we also, I think early on, we wanted to validate just the concept of this cloud approach because it was novel and new. So the difficulty with this is that it just means we've always had this split focus where we need to split our focus between actually running the business and running at high quality and et cetera, and keeping again, keeping the plane flying. And then we also have been building totally new technology. So, and we've had to do that, for most of the company's history with a very small team. And so that's challenging, right? It's split focus, lots of different types of disciplines involved, being very client facing at the same time, trying to do R&D. So I would say that's like a overarching biggest challenge, I would say. What was your second question? Sorry.
Piggybacking off of that, what were some of the greatest accomplishments?
Greatest accomplishment. Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest accomplishment is that I think back 5 years ago, my dream at that point in time was like, hey, like, I think we can make this cloud lab where we're going to have like hundreds of reactors and be working with these clients I'm talking to. And like right now we've done it. Like a bunch of the clients like that we sat in the labs with early on, where we were talking to them and getting tours, and we're like, we want to solve your problems. Like those are our clients now. Like we actually work with them. They're using our services. They're getting a lot of value from it. It's like helping them get their products to market faster. It's like very real. So actually what's really cool is like, if I think about, 5 years ago, like what we were actually trying to achieve, and like what this product was, like it sort of is doing it. So I think that feels great. And, I have to like stop myself, because I tend to be someone who's always thinking about what's next, what's the big thing, how can we make this even more impactful, what are the further problems we can solve. But we also today, like, if I go back and set my expectations back to where they were 5 years ago, we've sort of met them. And so I think that's something to feel really proud of, and to know that we really are helping many companies in the space at this point develop their processes. And so that I think that's a great achievement from the team.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's really a great accomplishment. It's so new in the industry. And I love the analogy of building the plane as you fly it. It's not as common in kind of the biopharmaceutical space, where a lot of times products have to be perfect when they get out there. And, being able to innovate kind of the business model, as well as, proof of concept of the technology and the approach, all of that, it really is incredible. So congratulations on the success so far. We're very excited to kind of follow the future. And so before we finish off, we'll just have a few like rapid fire questions to ask you. Would love your thoughts on certain points. So to get started, we'll imagine that it's 2050 and we would like to discuss the bioeconomy. So what does the bioeconomy look like, and where is culture then?
Yeah, sure. Wow, it's so hard to predict 30 years in advance. The first thing I'll say is that so the concept of like biotech company still exists, but most companies are biotech companies. So the analogy would be today, most any brand has their own software development for their own like apps, right? In 2050, most companies that build stuff will do biotech to some degree, because biotech will be so important to how new things are made, like new molecules, new substances, that like just to be a relevant company, like you'll need to like do biotech. So yeah, all of your, think about all your consumer brands that are making new clothing, or your food companies, or maybe even like furniture companies that are trying to make new materials. Like they will have the most advanced companies will all be doing biotech. So that's the first thing. So you'll sort of see, I think, biotech infused into all these brands where they're doing the work. So the whole industry, right, will sort of evolve as a result of that. Like there could be more like these pure ingredient companies that are servicing those brands. There'll be more platforms like Culture and like, various forms of that are all servicing all of these different, because like biotech is everywhere, right? Like if you have, Nike doing, biotech to make new materials for their shoes, then there'll be Culture and various, further iterations of Culture and similar companies servicing Nike, right? So that's the first thing I would be thinking of when I think about what does the bioeconomy look like. It looks, it's sort of diffuse and everywhere. If I think about biomanufacturing, I think that in 2050, bioreactors will definitely still be a thing, but there will also be other forms of biomanufacturing, and you won't only do brewing, basically, a fermentation. Like there could be, and I think it will be unexpected in terms of exactly how, but perhaps we'll have gotten very good at engineering plants by then, and we will be engineering different plant organisms to produce things for us. There's all sorts of different possibilities about how biomanufacturing might actually happen, that it's really hard to predict 30 years in advance. There could be just totally new forms of biomanufacturing. The other thing I'll say is that the bioeconomy will also encompass a lot of other products or applications that are like outside of like tradition, like biomanufacturing. Like, right, if you think about the paradigm today, it's you engineer an organism to make a molecule, which then goes into something. There'll be a lot of other products that are where you engineer biology, and that itself is like the product. Like, we've talked for years and years now about like a glowing plant or whatever. I do think there will actually be real applications like that, where some kind of engineered biology will in itself be the product offering. And those could be, interesting sensors in the environment. It could be different ways of having fragrances. It's hard to really predict, but I think that like biology itself will be a part of products, or maybe just it is the product itself. So I think you'll see, again, like you'll see biotech or bioeconomy product applications that are outside of this like traditional paradigm of, using biomanufacturing to make a molecule. Yeah, I think, what else in 2050? I think that I would hope by then, just generally genetic engineering is very much like a very simple task. There's just the software platforms are just like sort of where you can give very high level design. Like you're like, I want an organism to do blah. And then there's like a whole like layers of design software. Again, if you're using the analogy of like computing, right? You have so many layers of computing that allows you to give very high level intent. And that turns into a design output. Like, and right now in synthetic biology, you're still at the very, 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 very low level. So I would hope in 30 years, you would be at a sort of a point of very abstract design. And then you can rely on your, the equivalence of compilers and et cetera to then, be checking your code and to be like, where you have a good sense of how the output of that organism design will go. So I would hope in that 30-year time, we've made some serious advancements there as well. Anyway, those are my various predictions, and maybe I'll look back in 30 years and I will laugh at myself. But those are some of my high level thoughts.
Well, I think it's very fun to always think about it and speculate, and being in the space that you're into, you think about things differently. I was loving to hear all of the kind of analogies to the software and computing space. Would love to ask briefly, since you've worked in both the tech world as well as the bio world now, would you have any kind of input to say as to what one side could perhaps learn from the other?
What does the tech world or the bio world learn from each other? I don't have any like pithy insights there. Yeah, I don't know. One thing I will say is that I think generally speaking, this is very, very generally speaking, I would say people who are in the bio quote unquote world are clearly have a sense of purpose for the most part, right? Like if they're in synthetic biology, they tend to be doing their work because they care about like the planet or climate change, or they want to like have an alternative to petrochemicals, or they want to reduce animal husbandry. If you're in the biopharmaceutical space, you tend to be motivated because you think it's amazing how a new gene therapy could cure blindness or could, really impact huge numbers of people in a profound way. So I tend to think that one thing I really like about the world of like quote unquote bio, is that a lot of the people who are part of it, they have some kind of core sort of drive or motivation that is sort of above purely, a profit-seeking enterprise. And that's one thing that I think, really motivates me to be in that space and motivates many people, motivates a lot of young people who are really just inspired to do something, to be in that space. So that's one thing that I wouldn't say is always the case in the tech world, right? And I think that, in the long run, in the economy of, I guess, just like people who want to like pick the thing that they spend their time doing in life, I think, when it'll generally win out when you have, companies that are working on something that has like a core motivation of healing the planet or healing people, right? Those core motivations will tend to work, like I believe would be, more attractive in the long run than one of, making the most money or working on Web3 or like, I guess, or whatever, whatever is the trend du jour in the tech world. So I think that sort of those core motivations that tend to attract the best talent and the most thoughtful folks should work toward it.
Well, I would say that's a nice pithy insight. Not something I've heard from too many of my colleagues who haven't really spent a ton of good time in some of the different industries. So I can appreciate that those remarks. So final questions. Would you have any advice for current students or professors who are looking to get involved in more of an entrepreneurial type of role in the life sciences or perhaps in tech?
Just got to do it. That's my major advice to you. If you're in the academic space, getting a PhD, or I don't know, you're a professor and you want to do something entrepreneurial or just be a part of the entrepreneurial space, you just got to do it. I don't know. There's no other advice I can really give. This reminds me of when I was 23 and I had been actually out of engineering for a year. And I was at this, I was just at this like random work dinner with some like pretty senior like engineering leader at the company I was at. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I made a good decision sort of going out of engineering. And I really want to do more engineering again. Do you have any advice for me? He was like, oh, you should just do it. Just go do more engineering. Like, what's stopping you? And I was like, that's true. And so that, I don't know, maybe that sounds sort of lame, but I think that you just have to make a decision and try and then plot a course to make it happen. So whether it's starting a business, there's so many different resources now to do that. Joining a startup, if you're a student, like definitely like try and intern at a startup. It's such a cool experience and you get to see so much of a company. If you're a PhD student or a grad student or undergrad, I really recommend that. I think if you're graduating, like, go do 1 or 2 years at working at a startup, especially a smaller one. You'll see so much. You'll learn so much so quickly compared to joining a large company. Doesn't have to be where you work for your entire career, but if you're considering wanting to be entrepreneurial, I highly recommend it. I think that yeah, I don't know. Those are some of my main points of advice.
And we hear that time and time again. You have to just start it. So we appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that as well.
Sure.
Closing things off, do you have any other closing thoughts, shameless plugs, or anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I don't think I have anything. I mean, I love biomanufacturing. I love this space. If anyone out there is curious to talk to me about your company, your work about biomanufacturing, I would love to hear from you. So, please just reach out directly and I'll probably will respond to you. So, but thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate being able to tell our story at Culture, my personal story, just talk more about biomanufacturing. So yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Will. This has been really an amazing episode, and we're very, very grateful for your time. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Cool. All right, we'll have a